I am doing my spring and summer wrap-up because it's been forever since I've done this, and I just skipped the spring wrap-up, so now we're combining it. It's fine. So I have a ton of books because this is all the books I've read from March until the end of August, so there's a lot. Okay, so I read 3 books in March. The first one was Rain the Earth by A.C. Gagin. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really remember too much about this book, but I had notes on here from right after I read it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and apparently I absolutely loved it. It's a fantasy novel set in a world where some people have like elemental abilities, but that's not a good thing. There's people looking for these people with the elemental abilities and hunting them down and killing them, basically. So the story starts with this girl, Shalia, I don't know how you pronounce it, and her family migrating to this new country to bring peace between their 2 lands because she's like marrying the king of where they're going, and it's kind of like this whole like peace treaty thing, except he's actually a horrible person, but you know. Anyway, she ends up developing an earth ability and has to hide that because of where she's at, and it's a lot more dangerous. And I don't remember this book very well because it was like 6 months ago, at least. But I remember really liking it, and it was really good with like the friendships and the family relationships. I remember really liking that about the book. Next, I read Restore Me by Tahara Mafi. This book. I meant to film a book review and then I didn't, so at some point I'm gonna have to reread this and then film a book review because it deserves a book review. So this was obviously 5 out of 5 stars. I read the whole thing in one day. It's like a 500-page book, and I read it in one sitting. I sat down and just read the entire thing. I think I was on spring break, actually. Anyway, this is the 4th book in the Shatter Me series. I'm pretty sure you've heard of it. It was all over the place when it came out. So yeah, I love it. It's so good. I can't wait for the next one because the ending of this one, what even was that? I need answers. Then I read Made You Up by Francesca Zappia. This was actually the first audiobook I ever listened to, and it was really good. I gave the book 4 out of 5 stars. The audiobook was phenomenal. This book follows a girl named Alex in her senior year of school, and she is dealing with schizophrenia. What I really liked about this book is it treats her schizophrenia as just like part of her everyday life, and it doesn't portray her as like this really violent person like a lot of books and movies sometimes do. You know, she's just a girl trying to get through high school. She just has some additional complications. If you want more of my thoughts, I have a book review up on my website. I'll link it in the description. And in April, I read 3 books. The first one I read was The Usurper King by Zeb Haradan. I actually received this book from the author in exchange for a review, which my review is up on my website. I will link that. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The book objectively was really good, but like for me personally, it was kind of outside of what I generally read. Or especially at that time, I didn't really read adult. I'm slowly getting into it, but I also didn't, it just wasn't my kind of book. But it's a self-published novel about this guy named Jim who's suffering from this disease that accelerates his lifespan, and the treatment for it is extremely expensive. So he goes on this game show, and it's basically predicting the future using like the entrails of animals, which is gross, but that's what it is. And the story kind of takes off when he discovers something about the future that kind of changes everything. Then I read My Heart and Other Black Holes by Jasmine Warga. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I also listened to this as an audiobook. I will say though, it is kind of a dark book, so I would say there is a trigger warning for suicide and depression. This girl, Azal, is contemplating suicide because of like several factors in her life. She goes on this website and ends up making this pact with this boy, Roman, and they basically like pick out a date that they're gonna do it and kind of go from there. And it was a really good book in the sense that I could really tell like what she was feeling and going through. But I also had issues with it, like most books that deal with mental illness. I'm not going to go into depth with the issues because of spoilers, but if anyone is curious, I am up for talking about it. Then I read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, 5 out of 5 stars. I've been rereading it, so this was my 12th time reading the book. I obviously loved it. Then for school, I took a creative writing class last semester and we read 3 books that we kind of read throughout the semester. We read The Best American Poetry of 2017, which is by several people. I still have my tabs in there from the stories we were reading. We read The Best American Short Stories of 2017. And Take 10 2, which is a collection of 10-minute plays. I read 4 books in May. The first was Olivia Twist by Lori Langdon. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. It's kind of a spin on Oliver Twist, which I haven't read, so I can't really judge how similar or different they are. It takes place in the 1800s, and Olivia's mother died during childbirth, and so Olivia ended up being raised as a boy because the people that took her in thought it would be safer for her like that because of just the time period that it's taking place in. So kind of throughout her childhood, she kind of grows up on the streets. When the story actually takes place, she's living with her uncle that she comes across later and he takes her in, and she's living like as a girl now, especially since she's older and basically an adult. But then pretty early on in the book, she runs into a boy who took care of her during her time on the streets, but he doesn't recognize her because he only knew her as a kid who was pretending to be a boy. And things take off from there and go in directions I definitely wasn't expecting, which maybe I would have if I had read the original novel, but I haven't, so who knows. Next, I read the Riser trilogy by Becca C. Smith. I will link her channel below. She's an AuthorTube channel. Please go check her out because she's awesome and her books are awesome, and I need to read more of her books, but this trilogy was so good. So it takes place in the future, like way in the future. It's about a girl named Chelson who can raise the dead and control them. She first learns about this ability when she's 7 years old. She accidentally kills her abusive stepfather and then brings him back to life and controls him to be a nice, loving dad. She's kept this ability from everyone, but that all starts to change at the start of the story when her mom is murdered. And then Chelson begins to uncover all of these government secrets with the help of her friends, and I love all of the characters. They're so great. And I gave all the books in the series 5 out of 5 stars. There's Riser, Reaper, and then Ripper. There's 3 books. And I think I just held up 4 fingers. There's 3 books. And I just love that I never knew what was gonna happen next. Like, I would think we were going in one direction and then something would happen and it would flip everything and I'd be like, whoa. So it was so good. I read them all super fast. Okay, now I'm gonna move into my summer wrap up. Okay, in June I read 4 books. The first one is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, also 5 out of 5 stars. Yeah. Then I read Beautiful Redemption, which is the final book in the Beautiful Creatures series by Kami Garcia and Margaret Stoll. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I can't really say much because it's the last book. I've talked about the other books in my winter wrap-up if you want to check that out, but overall it was an amazing conclusion. Then I read The Accident Season by Maura Foley Doyle. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It was a strange little book. It's really short, and it's about this family who is always accident prone during a certain time of year, which I think is around October, so it's a good book for like spooky season. I didn't read it during spooky season, but I feel like it's a good Halloween-ish type book. Anyway, in this particular year that the story takes place, things are even weirder than usual, and the main character is determined to find out what's really going on with the accident season and why it exists. A big thing with me, I think it was the writing style that kind of threw me off. It's a lot like We Were Liars, and I had trouble getting into that writing style, but the book as a whole kind of reminds me of that. Then I read Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It's the second book in the Lunar Chronicles, and whereas Cinder, the first book, had ties to Cinderella, this one is connected to Little Red Riding Hood. So it follows this girl named Scarlet who is on a quest to track down her kidnapped grandmother with the help of a guy named Wolf. And this ends up being tied to Cinder's whole storyline, and the two of them inevitably cross paths, and it was really good. Can't wait to read the third book in the series. I read 7 books in July. Thank you, Booktubeathon. Some of those books are in August because it was at the end, but whatever. The first book I read in July was The Walls Around Us by Nova Rensuma. This book I gave 3 out of 5 stars. It's in dual perspective. One is a girl who is in a juvenile detention center, and the other one is told from a girl who's outside of it, but those two are connected by an event that happened before all of this went down. And this is also kind of it has like psychological thriller type elements to it, and I really liked that. This one did also kind of have a weird writing style, but I overall really enjoyed it. Next, I read The Brink of Darkness by Jeff Giles. This is the sequel to The Edge of Everything. I actually received this as an ARC. If you don't know, The Edge of Everything is about a girl who crosses paths with this mysterious guy who's from a place called the Lowlands, and he basically reaps the souls of people who do awful things. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, the sequel, which I think I gave the first one 3 out of 5 stars. I gave this one 4 out of 5 because I loved it so much more than the first book. The book 1 had a lot of like cliche elements, and this one really just had a lot more action and plot, and it just really blew me away. Then I read The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodkin. 5 out of 5 stars to every single book in the series. I read this last year and I reread it this year because it's so good and it's so twisted and dark, but it's amazing. I have a book review up for the first one if you want to check it out. I don't think the review is very good because it was a while ago and it's just not good, but the information about it's there. So like I said, I read The Evolution of Mara Dyer, 5 out of 5 stars, and 5 out of 5 to The Retribution of Mara Dyer. Then I read A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. This was the first book I read for Booktubeathon, and the books right after this are all Booktubeathon books that I read. Everybody kind of knows what this is, so I'm not going to go much into it, but I loved this book. I did cry. I did watch the movie and also cried then too. Then I read One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. This book was also 5 out of 5 stars. I've been waiting a while to read this, and it was so good. It did not disappoint. It's kind of like a spin on The Breakfast Club, wherein 5 kids go into detention and 4 only walk out because one of them is dead. And the other 4 end up like under investigation, and it's just this whole great mystery, and I totally figured out what happened before it was revealed. Then I read 8 books in August. These are still Booktubeathon books. I read The Keeper of the Mist by Rachel Neumeyer. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. It was kind of a disappointment, not gonna lie. It's a fantasy book, but to me it felt like there was just a lot of random plot lines happening that I'm still not completely sure how some of them were connected or like what was happening in the book. Basically, this girl lives in this country where nobody outside of it can see it because it's protected by this magical mist, and at the beginning of the story the current ruler dies and that power transfers to her, and so now she's in control of like keeping everyone safe. So the premise of the book was really interesting, but there was just so much random things going on that I'm not really sure what was happening. Then I read Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia, and this book, 5 out of 5 stars. If I could give it more, I would, because it deserved all the stars. It was so good. It was so good. It was so good. It was so good. I'm going to make a separate review for this book. I promise. I will. I know I've said this in my Booktubeathon vlog, but I'm going to make a review for this book. I'm actually going to be rereading it soon because I just ordered myself a physical real copy because before I got it from the library. It's a book about a girl who is super shy and introverted in real life, but online she's like this famous web comic creator. Like, so many people know who she is and her work, but she goes by an alias, like just her online name. Nobody knows her actual identity. And so one day at school she meets this boy and finds out that he is a huge fan of the series, and he even writes like fan fiction for it and everything. But he doesn't know who she actually is, and they become friends and everything, and he's not aware of that he's friends with like the creator. But the story just takes off from there, and it was beautiful. It was amazing. It was so good. And it really deals with anxiety and depression, and I've honestly never read a book that felt more real. For me personally, I have anxiety, and some of the passages in the book, I was just like, yes, that is what it feels like. I've felt that before. So I'm definitely gonna read it again and then make a review that goes into like specifics, because I just really want to talk about it. Then I read This Is Where It Ends by Marieke Nijkamp. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. This one was also a little bit disappointing. It's told from 4 different points of view over the course of 54 minutes. It's a really short book. I read it in like 2 hours or something. It's about a school shooting, and we see from these four kids, some of them are in the school, some are outside of the school, like what their perspective of what's going on. And I really debated between a 2 and a 3 star, because there were things about it that were done well, but there was also a lot of issues I had with it, and things I feel like could have been handled better. Then I read A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars and an A+ for the audiobook, because the audiobook is so good. It follows Jamie Watson and Charlotte Holmes, who are descendants from Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. The 2 of them meet at a boarding school in America, because they're both from like London, like Europe and everything, and they're brought together when a murder happens at their school, and they both end up being suspects. It's good. It's so good. I love the characters and the storylines, and I might do like a series review when I'm done with it. But the last book I read for Booktubeathon is The Raging Ones by Becca and Krista Ritchie. I received an ARC of this book, 5 out of 5 stars. So good. It's a sci-fi novel told from the point of view of 3 characters who all become linked, both physically and mentally, on the day they're supposed to die, but they don't. So in this world, everyone knows the day they're going to die, and everybody's kind of separated into these 3 categories. Like, you're either gonna die as like a child, you're gonna die in like your teen or young adult years, or you're going to live like a full, complete lifespan. And so the way that everybody was grouped together and the way each group was treated was really interesting. And so the 3 of them don't die on the day they're supposed to die, and it becomes this whole thing. They're trying to not get caught. And it was just really good, and it went in directions that I wasn't expecting. Then I read A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This was a reread. I reread only this one, not ACOTAR, and not the 3rd one, just this one. This is personally my favorite in the series. I'm sure most people know what this is, so I'm not gonna go into details. Then I read Away We Go by Emil Ostrovsky. I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars. I probably would have given it 2.5 if I could have done half stars on Goodreads, but I went with 2. It's about a virus that has taken over and infects kids that are under the age of 18, and everyone who gets it pretty much dies by the age of 18. So the kids live out the rest of their days in these boarding school type places, and they pretty much wait to be taken away, which is what happens when they get so sick that they can't even stay there anymore, even though they were already like quarantined from the rest of the world. I really don't know how I feel about this book. It just felt like one big metaphor, and I get what it was trying to say and everything, but it just felt kind of off to me, like something was missing. And it also kind of felt like a contemporary book that was trying to be sci-fi, but it was still contemporary, if that makes sense. I don't know. Also, the timing in this book was really weird because it would be like present day, and then we'd have a section that was like 7 months ago, and then like 2 years ago, and then it would be like 10 months ago, then back to present day, and it was just kind of like jumping around, and I never really knew where we were at in the timeline. The last book of this wrap-up is Mind Games by Kirsten White. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. It's about 2 sisters, and it's told in both of their points of views and alternating timelines, but this one was easier to keep up with. So there's these 2 girls, Fia and Annie, and they get placed at this special school after the death of their parents. But there's a catch with this situation. Annie can see the future, and because of that, they lock her up in her room and they don't let her go anywhere, and they basically use her for their own purposes. And then Fia, they kind of blackmail with, they're like, you're gonna do whatever we tell you to do, and you're gonna do it because if you don't, we're gonna kill your sisters. So it's the whole thing. That's not what I really expected this book to be about, but that's where it went. I liked it well enough, but again, I feel like there was something missing. There is a sequel, and I've heard that a lot of people are like, the 2 books could have been made into just one bigger book, so maybe that's what I feel like I'm missing. Like, maybe that book has more? Okay, that's it for the books I read during the spring and summer months. It was a lot. I'm gonna try not to skip again, so next will be my fall wrap-up, which will be September, October, November. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what books you've read recently and what you think about any of the books I talked about today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.